Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Tattoos Book Club. We're reading Daniel Boulud's book, Letters to a Young Chef, and we're on the second chapter. I realized if some of these chapters are too long, we'll probably just cut them in half and do another video of it. If you guys want me just to read through, leave me a comment. Sorry for my accent, my slurring, so I talk. But hopefully we'll get through this, okay? So, we're on chapter 2, and it's called Mentors. You will not take the same path that I took, but nonetheless, you will proceed from one job to the next as you develop your career. Where do you start? Well, at this stage of the game, no doubt you have some friends who have gone to some good kitchens, or one of your teachers in culinary school noted your raw talent, or maybe you have a family connection. Whatever the case may be, you know somebody somewhere. My advice is to try them first. It's a big world out there. I just stopped some old ladies looking at me all weird. My advice is to try them first. It's a big world out there, but a small community of chefs. Your goal is starting out is to get your foot in the door with a good one. Not one of the great ones necessarily, but someone who knows how to cook very well, and just as importantly, knows how to run a restaurant that maintains a reputation year in and year out. So you want to work at a good restaurant. Be careful of the trendy places with the supermodel waitress and so-so food. Look for a place where you can feel soul in the food, in the people, in the room. The first place you work in is an important step for you, because once you're connected within the chef family, especially at the level of restaurant you and I are both interested in, your second job will be a whole lot easier to find than the first. At some point, you will be able to go to your chef and say you want to move on. And if you have a good job, and if you've done a good job, and there's no room to advance in this kitchen, you can pretty much count on his picking up the phone and making a call for you. Nadron was only too happy to call George Blanc for me when that day came. Or maybe the sous chef for whom we worked has moved on, and you could call him to maybe ask a friend, maybe he knows somebody. Like most businesses, especially at the top, the restaurant business is one of connections, and you make connections quite obviously by meeting and working with the right people. What I'm talking about here is what people in every walk of life call building your resume combined with serious networking. I have never hired anybody on the basis of a resume alone. In fact, if that is all a person has to recommend him, something goes off in my head and nothing perhaps. I wonder, did he pay his dues at his last job? Because if he did or she had, someone is doing to help that person get the next job. So remember, this is written kind of weird because he's French. So yeah, so it's not me, I promise. So lesson number 1, always leave on a good note. If you sign on with somebody who you look to as a mentor, it's important to make the commitment to stay for 2 years or so, largely because in the beginning, I promise, you will not be up to speed in the kitchen. By that, I mean that your skills, knowledge, and palate are still very much weak in the works in progress. Right, like anything else. Simply by taking you on, any chef is making an investment in you. You need to stay long enough to pay back that investment. So hopping from one place to the next is the surest way to burn bridges. And in a small world of good restaurants, you only need to burn one to damage your career. Doing the job well, always being prepared, and accepting every task as a challenge are the best things you can do for your resume. If you have to mail it in code, save the stamp. You may not know anybody at the top, but if you have connections at all, use them. Now is the time to ask for an introduction to a good kitchen. Usually people are ready to take a chance on someone young and full of enthusiasm. I gotta stop right there. Young or old, if you're showing that you're really interested and that you have a good work ethic, most chefs will take you. You know, they rather have someone that's like a good worker and they'll teach you their ways, you know, than someone else. But that's what 2 cents. You may not get paid very much of it. You might have to stage the internship. Many people have done one with me. The way I look at it, their compensation is learning from my organization, which is true. A big thing in the culinary world is that we have, you know, you stage, you can work somewhere for free, you learn. And instead of going to culinary school, you just bounce from here to there to really cool restaurants that you learn techniques and stuff. Sorry, side note. I can guarantee you that you know more people in the business than I did when I started. I was barely a teenager when I went into the kitchen. As a low man on the team, my job was to go to the market in Lyon first thing in the morning to pick up supplies. Guess who else was there? The obsessive and legendary chefs of Lyon, and they saw me there all the time. For a chef, being in Lyon in those days was like being a musician in Liverpool when the Beatles were getting together. These were the guys who were changing the food world. They were at the market so early to make sure they got their very best ingredients before anybody else had the chance to buy them. There were beautiful vegetables from the farms of the Rion and wild herbs and cheeses from the mountains of eastern France, and glistening fish fresh from the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. So even though I had the least desirable job in the restaurant, I also got to rub elbows with the greats. This does not mean that I was able or even try to get a job with them, but I got to see how great chefs act and think and handle ingredients, and that was invaluable. Once the marketing was done, I would sit down at one of the local bouchons and have a bowl of tripe with them. They would open a bottle of wine. After 3 years of apprenticeship with Nedron, I figured I had learned about all I was going to learn there. So I moved on to George Blanc's restaurant. He was interested in refining this traditional food into hot cuisine. When I say we came from similar traditions, I also must point out that his family style cuisine has become world famous at his mother's La Mire Blanc, a wonderful one-star restaurant along the old wine route down the Burgundy. But Blanc elevated that country food to an art. Something as simple as frog legs, which you could get anywhere, he made so that they were the best frog legs you could ever hope to have. Perfectly crisp, perfectly seasoned, perfectly moist, perfectly balanced between the full aroma of garlic, shallots, and the herbal accents of parsley and thyme. Sounds good. As I look at the modern dining landscape and see first the advent of comfort food and then the reinvention of the food on modern American menus, I recognize a process. That's a process I've learned from the chefs I've worked for. When you work with a great chef, your job is not to be creative, but rather to interpret the creativity of the chef from who you're working for. The chef has an idea for a dish that comes from a deep understanding of cooking and ingredients. If you can help interpret his ideas, his inspiration and techniques, you will enrich your foundation as a chef. For example, one day George Blanc had an idea for sorbet. It was a sorbet cocktail with 4 fruits. He told us to use grapefruit juice, orange juice, a little bit of lemon, grenadine, banana, pineapple, and some vanilla for balance. It was very important to him that you could taste and smell everything. He didn't want any one fruit to dominate so that the diner might think it was simple banana sorbet or just a pineapple sorbet. It had to be an everything sorbet. Equal. This recipe was all about balance. I was the one he asked to test and retest and measure and get it right. I can remember very vividly one afternoon when I made the mise en place for the recipe. So the mise en place is like getting all your ingredients together. So when you're cooking, you're not like running around. It's all put together. Mise en place. Tidbit for the recipe. I worked directly with George on this, and our one-on-one gave me a feeling of connection to him that one rarely had in the hustle and bustle of service. My responsibility was to make sure that I was creating the perfect sorbet. Blanc could approve it, or if not, help guide me as to make it better. This was true whether the task was as simple as the sorbet, or as inspired as complex as poularde de brisée, stuffed with crayfish, chicken liver, foie gras, porcini mushrooms, and truffles. During the experimentation phase of any dish, there is constant communication between the chef and cook, slowly bringing the dish into harmony with the chef's vision. Getting it right, which I did, was a tremendous satisfaction. Those years served them and me well. It was my first 3-star restaurant. So in the culinary world, there's the Michelin stars, right? And you get like 1, 2, 3. Like they score you on the front of house, back of house, like all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and there's a book we read about the Michelin star and you know the way it goes. But just a little bit of a good tidbit, you know, when you're raising your like stars, it's Michelin. That's like that's the biggest thing you can achieve. Okay, those years served them and me well. It was my first 3-star restaurant. Blanc was still at 2 when I was there, and a whole new level of the game. Working in such a stable of thoroughbreds made each of us better. We learn the same lesson that you will learn if you find a good restaurant with a good team. Although everything is based on skill and the reputation of the chef at the top, hot cuisine is a team sport. In cooking and in another person's cuisine, discipline, not your creativity, is the most important quality. Expressing what the chef wants and doing so with his or her team requires it. In addition to the deep braising of lamb, veal, beef, and poultry, it was a braising station where I learned how to cook. Sauces are their own discipline. Everything you know about flavor and balance is concentrated to the ninth degree. What tastes too strong in the sauce will mix spectacularly on the plate, and you have to be able to imagine the effects of the end result just by tasting what's in the pan. I remember a velvety sauce duck made with the blood of the duck, giblets, a traditional mirepoix tidbit. Mirepoix is what the French use a lot to like make stocks and sauces. Mirepoix is onions, celery, and carrots, and it's usually 2 onions, 1 carrot, 1 celery, usually. So, provincial herbs, and figs. It was so complex yet so focused at the same time. To this day, I merely have to hear the words steak à poivre to taste his reinvention of the traditional recipe. I learned cooking with all my mentors, but just as important, I observed the management side of cuisine, which is equally valuable to any success as a chef. As you move through the ranks of a great kitchen, you pick up management by watching the people above you, watching the chef. You may have all the creativity in the world, but it won't guarantee you success in a restaurant, because if you cannot run a brigade, so brigade is like the whole crew in the kitchen. So like saute, fry, grill, that's what it's called, the brigade. And we'll read a book about that guy too that came up with the brigade system. So, where was I? Oh, because if you cannot run a brigade of 20 people, you cannot run a restaurant. In order to learn to run the brigade of 20, you must first learn to run a brigade of 5 or 6 on the meat station, the fish station, the hot app station. It doesn't matter which station, as long as you run it well. Management is where the fantasy of being a chef runs into the business end. You go into cooking, no doubt, because you find it pleasurable, but business always comes before pleasure. The connection to your mentor, the understanding of what or she does to run a successful business, these are things you acquire over years. Apparently, I did, because after a few years, when I thought it was time to move on, I did. I moved to Denmark. Denmark, though, was a whole new country, and I had seen very little of the world so far. It was really my first chance to indulge in the chef's fantasy of taking his skills anywhere and making a living while learning a new culture. Our profession is one of the few that affords you this freedom. If you're a lawyer or a doctor or a stockbroker, you cannot just pull up stakes and start over in a new country, or a bunch of new countries. As a chef, however, you take your knives and your passport and you chop onions in any country that will have you. My year and a half in Denmark was a happy time. I rode my bicycle everywhere. I learned about using ingredients such as caraway seed, cumin, or other dried seeds that play such a large part in Nordic gastronomy. I learned independence away from the womb of French cooking. I picked up a good deal about managing people, but after a year and a half, I said I've done it. That's it. I've learned a lot, made better money than I ever made, but my education is not over. And again, it was time to move. I heard from a friend whom I knew that Michel Guillard was opening a restaurant. And I went, you know what? I'm still young. I could afford to make no money and learn from the best. So I made the decision to go back to another 3-star restaurant, slide back down the totem pole, and take a big pay cut to do it. In the long run, though, I figured it would pay off. He had taken an unusual route to chefdom, the pastry kitchen. Only after a successful pastry career in Paris, Guillard, he embraced the emergency style of Nouvelle cuisine. Not only that, when he opened his first restaurant, Le Pot de Fou, it was in the blue-collar neighborhood. The food was astonishing that soon the bistro became the rage of Paris. Guillard learned from his mentor, an underrated but hugely influential chef, who among the forefathers of Nouvelle cuisine. So my new mentor had his own mentor, and you could trace it back down. Guillard, partly by personality and by virtue of his background, created what I would call the haute couture of food. every detail done by hand and to measure. We made a rabbit cassoulet that included baby turnips, both the root and the greens, sage, savory, garlic sprouts, and ognas, a purple onion found in the southwest. The vegetables and the rabbit cooked together, but in separate stages. So that's probably like they cooked the vegetables first, took them out, cooked the rabbit, something like that. Tidbit. I compared this to haute couture, that is, preparation of each part of the recipe according to its requirements and perfectly married with equal care, because this is very much the way that a Parisian designer and his crew did things. At the same time, Girard was almost spiritual about cooking, and in that regard, I have always thought of him as the poet of food. Precision in technique and poetry in approach. I cannot think of two better qualities for a chef. He taught me about perfection of the ingredients and the mission of the chef to present the true pristine flavors of each ingredient. His salad, gourmand, in the 80s, was the most copied salad. For example, a green bean salad, the French green beans as thin as a needle shaved, with foie gras poached in duck fat, showered with slivers of black truffles, tossed with chervil and chive and crispy heart of lettuce. Very simple, but if it didn't have the perfect balance, the perfect beans, the most delicate foie gras, the most pungent of truffles, the most tender of butterless lettuce, the result will be pretentious and not very good. Every step has to be precise and perfect. Girard was very patient, but he would not settle for less than your best. If you messed up one step in a recipe that called for 35 ingredients, he would always know it, and you were dead meat. Dead meat. With Girard, I arrived at a golden moment. In February, 2 months before his restaurant was to reopen for the season, Girard had plans for a shop in Paris at a Place de Madeleine, right next to Heride and Fauchon, the world's greatest spice shop. So there were four of us: Girard, Didier, Jackie, and me, in the small town in France, in the middle of nowhere. All we had to do was create and test new dishes for the shop and restaurant. Girard was at his peak in his own zone, Planet Girard. And in his business, rarely does one get to work with such a great chef so closely and so directly in the act of creation. Sometimes when a chef writes a cookbook, a young chef collaborates on testing and refining dishes. So I was not the only one to have this experience, but with no restaurant pressure or book deadline, I felt a special grace. Girard's team would sometimes combine his vision with the techniques of kitchens we have worked in all over France. The result was a marriage of many master chefs throughout the intermingling of their cooking genes and the young chefs who had worked for them. So all that I said about subordination, your creativity to the vision of your chef in the end did result in our being called out to create in our own right. This is the way of the world, not only in cooking. Work with a master, learn to think like the master. On one day, the master will have the confidence to ask you to move his work forward. When this happens, you are on your way to being your own master, or at least have taken a first step. I like that. I'm gonna read that one more time because I stuttered. This is the way of the world, not only in cooking. Work with the master, learn to think like the master, and one day the master will have the confidence to ask you to move his work forward. When this happens, you are on your way to being your own master, or at least have taken a first step. This little section, like, it touches a lot. Like, I feel that it's true, like, you have to have mentors, and I was fortunate enough to find really good people to push me in the right direction, who fed my knowledge. A lot of it was reading books. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you can just Google stuff. Yeah, but nothing's like reading a book, man. I feel like you read a book, you're part of it, and I feel like I learned from it, you know. And, you know, the section where it says, like, you know, you're there for the chef. And it's true, like, I felt a lot of chefs, you know, with their ideas in food and stuff, but it helped me with my techniques and with all my stuff, you know, so it was good. My mom's calling me, gotta answer her. But anyway, thanks for subscribing. Thank you for tuning in. This is 20 minutes, I know. Maybe I'll make them shorter, or maybe I'll just like read bits and parts that I feel that are better. I don't know yet. Leave me a comment. Hey, I think you should do this. Just read them through, whatever you think. Like I said, I'm new to this. I'm down to work things again. So once again, we're reading Letters to a Young Chef from Daniel Boulud. Subscribe, stay tuned. On to the next chapter. Love, peace, bacon,